January 22nd, 1973. Athens. A Piaggio P-136L-2 amphibious aircraft, registration SX-BDC, lifts off from Hellinikon International Airport on a local check flight. At the controls is Alexander Onassis, 24 years old, heir to the largest privately owned shipping fleet on the planet. The plane reaches about 100 feet. Seconds later, the aircraft hits the ground. 27 hours later, the New York Times files its report. Alexander Onassis, the 24-year-old only son of Aristotle Onassis, the multimillionaire, died in hospital here of a brain hemorrhage tonight, 27 hours after his plane crashed at the Athens airport. Aristotle Onassis had spent half a century building a fortune designed to outlive him, to pass from father to son to grandson, a Greek dynasty built on oil tankers and ocean routes, and hundreds of millions of dollars. Alexander's death didn't just take his child, it shattered the mechanism. The fortune had no male heir, the succession line was broken, and the money that was supposed to protect the Onassis bloodline would shadow the family's story for the next 50 years. He built one of the greatest fortunes of his era. It outlasted the family it was meant to secure. To understand what happened, you have to understand the scale of what he built, because the pressures surrounding that fortune were proportional to its size, and its size was extraordinary. Aristotle Socrates Onassis was born in 1906 in Smyrna, in the Ottoman Empire, to a Greek family in the tobacco trade. His father, Socrates, was a successful merchant. The family was comfortable. Then the Greco-Turkish War arrived. In September 1922, Turkish forces recaptured and burned the city. Several of Aristotle's uncles, an aunt and her daughter were killed. Socrates was imprisoned. The family's property was seized. What had been a comfortable merchant life became a refugee crisis overnight. Aristotle, 17, sailed for Buenos Aires in 1923. He worked nights as a telephone switchboard operator for the British United River Plate Telephone Company. Days, he studied commerce and port administration. In 1924, with his father's help, he founded the Aristotle S. Onassis Import-Export Company, selling Turkish-style tobacco to Argentina's growing immigrant population. The business caught fire. By 25, he'd made his first $1 million. During the Great Depression, while established shipping companies were abandoning vessels, Onassis began buying ships cheaply. After World War II, he purchased 23 surplus Liberty ships from the United States and pivoted hard into oil transport, commissioning 17 supertanker vessels in 1954 alone. He signed long-term fixed-price contracts with major oil companies like Texaco, Mobil, and Sacconi, locking in profits before markets turned against him. By January 1953, Time magazine was painting the picture in full. At 47, Onassis has homes in Paris, New York, Montevideo, and Antibes, owns or controls a fleet of 91 tankers, freighters, and whaling ships worth an estimated $300 million, and has a pretty 23-year-old wife. That wife was Athena Mary Livanos, called Tina, the daughter of shipping magnate Stavros Livanos. She was 17 when they married in December 1946. Aristotle was 40. The union merged two Greek shipping dynasties, and it produced two children, Alexander, born April 30th, 1948 in New York, and Christina, born December 11th, 1950, also in New York. The empire kept growing beyond shipping. In 1953, Onassis took control of Monaco's Société des Bons de Mer, which meant he owned the Monte Carlo Casino, the Hôtel de Paris, the Yacht Club, and roughly a third of the principality's land. From 1957 to 1974, he operated Olympic Airways, Greece's national airline, one of only two privately held airlines in the world, the other being Howard Hughes's TWA. Paul Ioannidis, a senior director, later described the arrangement with a certain candor. He was married to the sea, but Olympic was his mistress. We used to say that he would spend all the money he made at sea with his mistress in the sky. Onassis financed the 52-story Olympic Tower on Fifth Avenue. He held stocks in oil companies across 5 continents, owned gold processing plants in Argentina and Uruguay, and maintained deposit accounts in banks worldwide. His private island, Scorpios, sat in the Ionian Sea. His 325-foot yacht, the Christina O, named after his daughter, entertained heads of state. Exact peak net worth depends on who's counting and when. Estimates range from $500 million to well beyond $1 billion. The precise number matters less than the gravitational effect. This wasn't simply wealth. It was a force field that seemed to warp everything inside it. Marriages, parenting, friendships, grief, even death. And the first people inside that force field were his own children. Alexander and Christina didn't grow up with parents. They grew up with staff. Aristotle was consumed by deal-making. Tina maintained a social calendar. Both children were raised by nannies and servants across properties in France, Greece, and England. William Wright's biography of Christina records that at age 5, the girl simply stopped speaking. Her parents hired experts. Nobody dared suggest the muteness was a plea for attention. Eventually, Christina started talking again on her own. Alexander had no formal schooling, private tutors, and his own apartment from a young age. He failed his exams at a Paris lycée at 16 and went to work for his father in Monaco in 1965, earning a salary of $12,000 a year. For the son of one of the richest men alive, the salary wasn't income. It was a reminder of who held the power. Alexander described himself as living under the shadow of the old man's wealth. Money often stood in for closeness in this family. When Alexander began a secret relationship with Fiona von Tyson, a British model 16 years his senior, Aristotle tried to break it up, not with a conversation, but with a $2 million villa outside Athens. Fiona saw the gesture for what it was, an attempt to absorb her into the collection of things Aristotle could control. She refused to accept any gifts from Alexander unless they came from the money he'd earned himself. At a disco, a man suggested to Fiona that she was only with Alexander because of his father's fortune. She punched the man in the face. That was the world these children inhabited. Wealth as weapon, wealth as accusation, wealth as the lens through which every human connection was measured and found suspect. Then their parents' marriage collapsed. Aristotle's affair with opera singer Maria Callas became public in 1960, and Tina divorced him. For Alexander and Christina, the betrayal wasn't just infidelity. It was proof that their father would sacrifice private loyalty for public appetite whenever it suited him. 8 years later, in October 1968, Aristotle married Jacqueline Kennedy on Scorpios. Alexander and Christina were furious. They'd hoped their parents might reconcile. Alexander's view was blunt. His father wanted the name, and Jackie wanted the money. Christina saw Jackie as her father's obsession. Neither child ever accepted the marriage, but neither child had any power to change it. Their father's money was also their father's authority, and in the Onassis household, one was often indistinguishable from the other. By the early 1970s, Aristotle had begun grooming Alexander as his successor. He named him president of Olympic Aviation, the regional subsidiary of Olympic Airways, in 1971. Then came the crash at Hellinikon. After Alexander's death, Aristotle's decline became obvious. As one later account put it, the public was well informed about his decline following his son's death and his loss of the will to live. Tina, who had remarried, most recently to Aristotle's business rival Stavros Niarchos, died in October 1974. She was 45. Aristotle tried to sell Olympic Airways after Alexander's death. His own health was failing. And there was the question of succession. The male heir was gone. Only Christina remained. According to the Los Angeles Times review of Wright's biography, Christina learned that in his despair over Alexander, her father had said, "Why wasn't my daughter killed instead of my son?" It didn't, the review noted, do wonders for her always fragile self-esteem. Aristotle Onassis died on March 15, 1975, in Neuilly-sur-Seine, France. He was 69. Within 29 months of Alexander's crash, Christina had lost her brother, her mother, and her father. She was 24. And she had just become the principal heir to one of the largest private fortunes on Earth. When Aristotle's will was published in June 1975, the terms were stark. The New York Times published the terms on June 8, 1975. Aristotle Onassis left the bulk of his estate to his daughter Christina, but provided for an annual allowance of $250,000 to his widow, Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, according to his will published here today. Roughly 55% of the estate went to Christina. The remaining 45% funded the Alexander S. Onassis Public Benefit Foundation, to be established in Liechtenstein in memory of his son. Aristotle appointed longtime advisors to manage both fortunes. According to Stelio Papadimitriou, Aristotle's lawyer and an executor of the estate, the gross assets exceeded $1 billion, though liabilities cut the net value sharply. The executors divided everything into two lots, A and B. Christina chose Lot B. The foundation received Lot A, and Christina quickly moved to assert control over as much of the inheritance structure as she could. She then pressured Jackie to accept a settlement. Sources place it between $20 million and $26 million, to abandon further claims. Jackie took the deal. By the time she died in 1994, she had turned that settlement into a far larger fortune through investments. A Los Angeles Times review of William Wright's biography carried a line that could have served as Christina's epitaph. An examination of the short, unhappy life of Christina Onassis should quell the envy anyone feels for the very rich. Christina inherited not just money, but a public identity largely defined by that money. She was watched, courted, pursued, and evaluated through the lens of what she was worth. Every man who approached her seemed to carry an invisible question mark. Was it love, or was it the $500 million? She married 4 times in 16 years. Every marriage ended in divorce. First, in 1971, Joseph Bolker, a Los Angeles real estate developer, divorced, father of 4, 27 years her senior. Aristotle disapproved. Bolker wasn't Greek, wasn't in shipping, wasn't strategically useful, and had Christina's London phones wiretapped to monitor the relationship. The marriage lasted 9 months. Second, in 1975, shortly after her father's funeral, Alexander Andreatis, a Greek shipping and banking heir who turned out to be deeply in debt. 14 months. Third, in 1978, Sergei Kauzov, a Soviet shipping agent. The world's tabloids seized on the spectacle of one of the world's richest women sharing a cramped Moscow apartment with her husband's mother. The marriage dissolved within 2 years. Fourth, in 1984, Thierry Roussel, a French pharmaceutical heir, handsome, charming, and unfaithful from the start. While Christina was pregnant with their daughter Athena, Roussel's longtime mistress, Swedish model Marianne Gabby Landhage, was also pregnant with his child, a boy named Eric, born months after Athena. Christina tolerated it. She invited Roussel, Gabby, and Eric to her estate and insisted on group photographs, as if performing a family that existed only through the gravity of her money. When Gabby gave birth to a second child by Roussel, Christina finally filed for divorce. And still, she hoped to reconcile. In the fall of 1987, she wrote to Papa Dimitriou asking for help and protection from Thierry, describing a system meant to lock up her capital because she knew how vulnerable she remained to him. She was describing her fortune as a prison designed to protect her from herself. By then, money had become both shield and prison in her life, the thing she relied on and the thing that made trust harder. Christina was diagnosed with clinical depression at 30. She was prescribed barbiturates, amphetamines, and sleeping pills, and developed dependencies on each. Her weight fluctuated wildly, sometimes exceeding 200 pounds, and her life became a cycle of crash diets followed by collapse. She spent $30,000 sending a private jet to the United States to keep herself supplied with Diet Coke. She once dispatched a helicopter from Austria to Switzerland to retrieve a David Bowie cassette she'd left behind. When friends said they were too busy to see her, she paid them as much as $30,000 a month to clear their schedules. Luis Basualdo, a polo plane socialite, was on her payroll for years at that rate, serving as a professional companion who curated her social life and wasn't above pocketing even more when the opportunity arose. She hired companionship. She paid for access. Money had become both barrier and substitute, a way to organize a life that still couldn't deliver much security or peace. On November 19, 1988, Christina's body was found by her friend Marina Dodero and a maid in the bathtub of a mansion in Tortuguitas, outside Buenos Aires. She'd been visiting friends. She was 37 years old. The official cause of death was pulmonary edema. She had battled eating disorders and drug dependencies for most of her adult life. Christina was buried on Scorpios, beside her father and brother, the third Onassis placed in that family plot in 15 years. Her daughter, Athena, was 3 years old. Thierry Roussel collected Athena immediately after Christina's funeral on Scorpios, bringing her to his family's home in France. She grew up in Switzerland, raised by Roussel and Gabby Landhag, the woman who had been his mistress during his marriage to Christina. Athena's half-siblings were Eric and Sandrine, Gabby's children by Roussel. Christina, even in death, had tried to shield her daughter from the money. She'd arranged a board of administrators to control the inheritance until Athena came of age. Every expenditure Roussel made on the girl's behalf required the board's approval. Christina had designed the mechanism because she knew, from personal experience, what the fortune attracted. The safeguard didn't hold. Roussel and the board fought viciously across multiple jurisdictions. Dozens of lawsuits piled up in Greek and Swiss courts. Roussel accused the board of mismanagement, defamation, and interference with his custody of Athena. Athena grew up inside this war. She attended school under guard. On the rare occasions she visited Greece, she was besieged by journalists and strangers who saw in her not a child, but the last living link to a global dynasty. Vanity Fair's Nicholas Gage, who spent 4 years researching the Onassis fortune, documented the financial consequences of the custody battle. According to Papa Dimitriou, Roussel demanded roughly $150 million over 11 years for Athena's care. He insisted the estate sell all its shipping holdings, just before tanker rates soared. He forced the sale of Athena's half-interest in the Olympic Tower in Manhattan, just before New York real estate prices surged. The foundation's half of Aristotle's estate, which stayed in shipping, tripled from around $250 million to over $1 billion in that same period. Athena's portion only doubled, to approximately $600 million, plus an estimated $200 million in real estate. Apartments on Avenue Foch in Paris, a home in Geneva, a compound on Ibiza, Scorpios, properties on Chios. In 1999, a Swiss court stripped management from both Roussel and the foundation board, handing it to KPMG Fides, a Swiss auditing firm. By then, Athena was already being publicly framed less as a future matriarch than as a distant, reluctant heir. Later reporting in Greece would fixate on how little connection she seemed to feel to the public Onassis identity. On January 29, 2003, Athena turned 18. She walked into a Swiss accountant's office, signed papers, and walked out as one of the richest young women on the planet. Estimates of her inheritance varied wildly, from roughly $600 million to as much as $3 billion, though other reporting placed the realistic total, including real estate, closer to $800 million. The Guardian ran the headline, "The Last Onassis Inherits Billions, and the Legacy of a Problem Family." After turning 21, Athena's lawyers attempted to install her as president of the Alexander Onassis Foundation, the other half of her grandfather's estate. The board refused, arguing publicly that she had no real connection to the culture or institution. Aristotle Onassis's sole surviving direct descendant was told, officially, that she had no meaningful connection to the legacy bearing her family's name. She married Brazilian showjumper Álvaro de Miranda Neto in December 2005 in São Paulo. Her father and stepmother didn't attend. The marriage ended in 2017, and she dropped the Roussel name, competing in equestrian events simply as Athena Onassis. The Onassis fortune, or at least the institutional half of it, is still working. The Alexander Onassis Foundation, headquartered in Vaduz and operating from Athens, remains a major private foundation. It built the Onassis Stegi Arts Center in Athens, exclusively funded and overseen by the foundation. Its business arm manages the estates and their investments. As the foundation states plainly, the foundation manages the estates itself through its services. The institutional fortune survived. It professionalized and moved into public benefit work, culture, education, philanthropy. The money did what great fortunes often do. It perpetuated itself. The family didn't. Alexander died at 24 in a crash just after takeoff. His mother Tina died at 45. Aristotle collapsed at 69, broken by grief and disease. Christina died at 37 in a bathtub in Argentina, living under wealth that brought her little visible peace. And Athena, the last direct descendant, grew up at a distance from her family's language and institutions, later denied control of the foundation that bears her uncle's name. Aristotle Onassis arrived in Buenos Aires in 1923 with almost nothing, and built an empire vast enough to reshape the economies of small countries. He intended the fortune to secure his bloodline for generations. The foundation's buildings still stand. Its programs still operate. The family name is on all of it. But the direct family line that was meant to carry it has thinned almost to nothing. The money survived. The family it was meant to secure didn't. Subscribe for more stories like this.